I don't know if you can see me. I think. Let me know. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jo. Like she just mentioned, I'm Anton Martinez. I'm a third-year PhD candidate, and I'm supervised by Professor Richard Benta, Professor Elizabeth Milne, and Dr. Georgina Rouse. So, you always heard someone who thinks that the Earth is flat, or that vaccines are something bad that either cause autism or they are implanted by microchips that will control our minds. Or more recently, that COVID-19 is a hoax or it's been fabricated in a secret lab by a powerful government. And one thing in common of all of these ideas is that they always involved a powerful antagonist. The case of flat Earth theory is usually the NASA, which has been withholding information from us all of these years. In case of anti-vaxxers, more recently, Bill Gates is the new enemy who is in charge of, trying to control our minds with microchips. And in case of this latest conspiracy, a secret lab by a very powerful government, depending on the government who is making that claim, of course. And we usually refer to these people like either being a conspiracist or paranoid. We usually say, oh, this is a paranoid person or having conspiracies. And we usually use this term interchangeably. However, conspiracies are usually defined as an explanation for a significant social and political event, for example, the COVID pandemic or the death of Princess Diana. And it usually involves secret plots by malevolent others, like I said, and they are usually powerful as well. Whereas paranoid beliefs tend to be defined as rigid, unfounded beliefs, meaning that they are inflexible, irrational, which usually involves intentional harm from others to the person who is holding that belief. So, is being a conspiracist the same as being paranoid then? Well, not necessarily. You see, people with conspiracy beliefs, they usually tend to have positive self-esteem. They tend to think themselves as, chosen ones who know the truth, whereas the others don't. Whereas people with paranoid beliefs tend to have quite negative self-esteem. Conspiracy beliefs tend to be shared by others. As a matter of fact, there are even conferences of flat earthers associations. And this is not the case for paranoid beliefs. They tend to be quite personal and idiosyncratic. They usually involve a threat to society. Like I said, vaccines are going to control us all, or they're withholding information from us. Whereas paranoid beliefs tend to pose a threat to the self, to the person. And conspiracy beliefs are not necessarily dysfunctional in everyday life, whereas paranoid beliefs, they impact behavior and can be quite distressing. However, there is something they seem to share, both structures, and that is excessive mistrust. So when we define trust, we usually say that there is a willingness to accept vulnerability to the actions of others, and that usually involves positive expectations from the other party's intention. For example, if I want to lend someone money, I know that that person will return the money. That's why I trust that person. Or if I vote a political party, I expect that a political party will promise their campaign promises, although it's usually not the case. And this encompasses then a cognitive, emotional, and a behavioral factor because we assess the person or the institution we're trusting. There's also an intuitive component, and it drives behavior. And like I said, it involves different modalities. You can have trust to a person, to an institution, to your hospital, to a political party, etc. So the aims of this study is to first assess if conspiracy and paranoia are two different factors, two separate factors. And we do this by either looking at paranoia and conspiracy items and see if they load into one factor, or looking at the same items, but the paranoia items loading into paranoia factor and conspiracy items loading into a conspiracy factor. And our second aim is to explore different trust predictors and what there is association with conspiracy and paranoia. So we used a cross-sectional design, and we collected our data using quota sampling method, stratified by age, gender, and income. So it means this is a representative sample of our general population. We collected our sample from 3 different countries, the UK, Ireland, and Spain. And we measure also dependent variables, conspiracy and paranoia, but also institutional trust, and within institutional trust, trust in political institutions, trust in scientific institutions, and trust in legal institutions. We also measure trust in sources of information, and within trust in sources of information, we measure trust in traditional sources of information like the media, TV, radio, trust in informal sources of information like family or friends, social media, the internet, and institutional sources of information like the NHS, government agencies, etc. We also measure interpersonal trust and perceptual trust. And the statistical analysis we used was the confirmatory factor analysis for our first aim and structure equation modeling, particularly path analysis for our second aim, in order to conduct a regression analysis. Okay. So how did we measure all of this? We use mainly self-report questionnaires, the persecution and the 7 scale for measuring paranoia, which happens like the following. There are times when I worry that others might be plotting against me. We also measure conspiracy mentality in the same way, where they were shown an item and people had to agree if they agree with the statement or not. And we measure trust in institution with a question, which people had to indicate how much they trust the following institutions. And we had parliament, legal systems, scientists, doctors, and other options as well. We measure trust in sources of information in the same way. And interpersonal trust also with a self-report measure. However, for perceptual trust, we use facial stimuli, and we selected 5 trustworthy faces and 5 untrustworthy faces that have been validated on that dimension. And we asked participants if they trust those faces, and based on their outcome, we calculated bias, which could be positive, which meant that they had a bias towards judging the faces as trustworthy, or negative, which is the opposite. Participants had a bias towards judging the faces as untrustworthy. And sensitivity, which is a measure of accuracy to see how accurate did the participants discriminate between trustworthy and untrustworthy faces. Okay, so let's go to the results. So for the first aim, we assess the latent structure in each country separately. And like I said, we had a 1-factor model in which all the items loaded into 1 single factor, and the 2-factor model. And we reported 6 measurements of fit. The first 2 indicates goodness of fit, meaning that a higher number indicates a better model, and the last 4 indicates badness of fit, which is a lower number indicates a better model. So we had first model with our indices, and the second model in each country with our indices. And we can see clearly that the second factor model was far better in each country. Also, we wanted to see if by combining the data of all the countries, if the latent structure differed across countries. And we did this doing a multi-group analysis, which is kind of a big ANOVA, and where you report certain indices, and then you assess the difference. And this difference is very small, indicating that the latent structure didn't differ across countries, so that we can use a combined data for our further analysis. So for our regression model, we reported standardized regression coefficients and also a measurement of effect size to assess practical significance, because we have a very big sample size, so the probability of finding significant results is high. So the semi-partial correlations will help us assess the magnitude of the effect. And we also did a wall test analysis, which gave us a difference, statistics, looking at the differences between this coefficient of conspiracy and the paranoia coefficient, if they differ between each other. Okay, so for trust in institutions, I mentioned earlier that we measured trust in politicians, trust in scientific institutions, and trust in legal institutions. And we found, again, that most of them are significant. However, the most stronger ones are associated with conspiracy and mistrust in political institutions. Other the differences between conspiracy and paranoia was strong based on the Wald test. We also look at different trust in sources of information, like traditional media sources of information, institutional and informal sources of information. And we found there was an association with trust, not mistrust, but trust in their own sources of information. So either both conspiracy and paranoia trusted more their own sources of information. However, again, this seems to be stronger for paranoia based on the Wald test. When we assessed bias and sensitivity, we found that a bias towards judging other faces as untrustworthy was associated with paranoia, but not with conspiracy. And when we measure interpersonal trust and neighborhood trust, we found a negative association, meaning that people with conspiracy and paranoia tend to mistrust people generally. However, this seems also to be stronger for paranoia. So we can summarize our findings by saying that conspiracy is associated with mistrust in institutions, that paranoia is associated with a tendency to judging others as untrustworthy, that also both conspiracy and paranoia are associated with trusting their own sources of information. However, this seems to be stronger for paranoia, and that both conspiracy and paranoia tend to have general mistrust to others. However, again, this seems to be stronger for paranoia. So, what can we conclude? First, that paranoia and conspiracy are two separate factors. Also, these results give us an approximation of the mechanisms regarding paranoia and conspiracy beliefs, meaning that conspiracy seems to be more associated with the social level of mistrust processes, whereas paranoia seems to be more associated with an interpersonal aspect. And this comes with limitations. First, this is a cross-sectional design, thus we cannot infer causality. And this data was collected during the first weeks of the first COVID-19 pandemic, so we have to be cautious when interpreting our results. This uncertain situation could have impacted on paranoia and conspiracy levels. And future directions should explore the underlying mechanisms of these processes by using experimental and longitudinal designs. And currently we're working on projects looking at causal variables of mistrust, particularly with paranoia. And we're looking at insecure attachment styles. And also we're exploring different cognitive mechanisms of mistrust processes by looking at explicit and implicit processes. I didn't want to stop and thank the COVID-19 Psychological Research Consortium, because this data comes from this group. This group was led by Professor Richard Bentzel and has been monitoring psychological and social variables along the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're still doing it, and involves universities across the UK, but also international, like the Republic of Ireland and in Spain, who have been collaborating with us. So thank you very much for your attention.